Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Patrick Kroupa, president of Universal Ibogaine Incorporated, online at ibogaineinc.com. He's a consultant for Clear Sky Recovery, online at clearskyibogaine.com. Patrick, welcome to the Goddard Report.
Greetings. Thank you very much for having me.
First off,
to be here.
What is Ibogaine?
Ibogaine is an indole alkaloid that's derived from Tabernanthe iboga, which is a shrub that grows in Africa. It has a very long history of use in the region with the natives, many of whom have various spiritual and, religious sort of coming of age ceremonies that involve the use of Ibogaine.
How did you find out about it?
Well, that's a very long story. I mean, originally I found out about Ibogaine because I was hanging around on the Lower East Side in New York City, and it intersected with these technology meetings called TAP, where there were a lot of activists from the 1960s who showed up there, and I really had absolutely no interest or understanding of their political background or where all of them came from, but the bottom line is that Ibogaine was first discovered to have efficacy against polysubstance abuse disorders by a drug-addicted individual named Howard Lotsof, who in 1962 made the rather remarkable discovery that if you were addicted to heroin and you took a dose of Ibogaine, when you were coming back down and sort of reintegrating, suddenly your habit was gone. It just disappeared somewhere. And that was a very profound experience for him. And he essentially started interacting with groups of other people, and there was sort of an informal treatment scene and information going back and forth during the 60s and 70s related to Ibogaine. And I first heard of Ibogaine in the 1980s. That was my initial introduction to it. Basically, the story is very long because it sort of begins in an underground setting and anecdotal observations, and it moves into the period of time when I first dosed with it, which was in the 1990s. During the 1990s, the FDA within the United States was sufficiently impressed with pre-existing data in animal models and anecdotal evidence from human beings to greenlight Dr. Deborah Mash from the University of Miami to begin clinical trials on human drug-dependent subjects within the states. And unfortunately, NIDA then refused to fund further research because their interest was more focused on maintenance medications, which can be highly profitable. So basically, the medicalized Ibogaine treatment movement sort of started in the 90s and has been growing exponentially ever since that point in time.
For how long has Ibogaine been used to treat addiction?
Well, to treat addictions, again, the very beginning was in the 1960s. 1962 is, Howard Lotsof's discovery that this is what this molecule can do. There was a paper published by Dr. Ken Alper that looked at the Ibogaine treatment scene. His paper was published in the early 2000s, and he was looking at all data available before that time. So prior to the year 2000, there are fewer than 1,000 people worldwide who had ever done Ibogaine outside of, the indigenous peoples who were local to where the plant grows in Africa. And those numbers have gone through the stratosphere since that point in time. But essentially, Ibogaine treatment sort of began informally in the late 60s, early 70s, and medicalized Ibogaine treatment, where we sort of have a better understanding of what's happening, how to control the situation, and safely administer Ibogaine using the correct safety protocols. That kicked off in the 1990s.
What addictions has Ibogaine been successful in treating?
The interesting thing with Ibogaine is it shows extraordinary efficacy for polysubstance abuse disorders. So that means it's very effective for all opioids and opiates. I mean, opioids are just synthetics, and opiates are, semi-synthetics or the derivatives of natural product chemistry. For example, heroin is an opiate, whereas, methadone would be an opioid because it's a synthetic. It's extremely effective for all forms of stimulants, be that, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, variety of molecules for which we have absolutely no pharmaceutical treatment available that has any efficacy whatsoever. And the standard form of treatment for opiates is they give people substitution therapy, which basically means you are switching somebody from an extremely addictive drug to another extremely addictive or more addictive drug that happens to be legal at the present time. Nobody is ever, quote unquote, cured of anything. Nobody's ever detoxed. It's just an endless stream of maintenance utilizing a different drug that does pretty much the same thing the drug you were addicted to. It also seems to have efficacy for nicotine. It seems to have efficacy for pretty much all substance abuse disorders, with the single exception of benzodiazepines. It does not have efficacy for benzos, which are the class of drugs that Valium, for instance, lives in.
It kind of reminds me of when heroin was first discovered, it was touted as a cure for morphine addiction.
Right, exactly. That was the early marketing materials for Bayer's miracle product. It was a cure for coughs, and it was completely non-addictive, totally safe, and it would cure morphine addiction. That's exactly right. It's actually remarkably similar to the marketing materials that Purdue Pharmaceuticals kicked out there for their miracle product OxyContin. It's completely harmless, and everyone should take a bunch of it. That's pretty much the story of heroin and oxy.
We'll have more with Patrick Kroupa right after the break.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI, and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Patrick Kroupa. Patrick, does Ibogaine work for everyone?
Well, it depends really on what exactly their addictions are. The short answer would be that it works for 90 to 95% of individuals who are addicted to drugs. It will reset your drug dependence with extraordinarily efficacy for, opiates, opioids, stimulants, polysubstance abuse disorders, because many people are combining all of the above. They're using alcohol, they're using coke, they're using oxy. It works for all of that. So essentially, Ibogaine will work to interrupt your drug dependence. What that means is your physical addiction will be eradicated. However, it will not completely rewire your psychology and who you are and why you started doing drugs in the first place. If you want to remain clean after taking Ibogaine, then aftercare is essential. It's a very important component in the journey to recovery and long-term stability.
Does a person need to want to be rehabilitated for Ibogaine to work?
That's a question that has two parts. The short answer is no. If you don't have any interest in being rehabilitated, you don't have any interest in getting sober, Ibogaine will still work. It will absolutely reset your habit. Your drug dependence will no longer be present. However, the question is, what does work mean? For most people, that means they want some sort of long-term sobriety and, well, freedom from slavery, essentially, which is what drug dependence ends up turning into, because your whole life revolves around obtaining these molecules. So if you want to stay clean, you do have to want it. And it does require work on your part after you've been cleaned up. Like I said briefly in a previous question, aftercare is extraordinarily important for long-term recovery, because if you detox someone, their slate has been wiped clean, everything is okay in terms of their drug dependence issues. If they go back to exactly the same environment they were using drugs in, start hanging out with the same people, and make no changes in their lives, then their long-term outcome is not that great, because they haven't made any changes. They're just going right back to the same situation they were in. It's very important to change what you're going back to, how you're going to respond. You need individualized therapy. You need group support. You basically need a plan in place for how you're going to maintain your newfound sobriety.
Is everyone a candidate for Ibogaine treatment, or does their current health status come into play?
Unfortunately, everyone is not a candidate for Ibogaine treatment. Essentially, you need to get an EKG or an ECG. You need to make sure that your heart is all right. You need a liver function panel. You need a basic comprehensive metabolic. Basically, you have to be generally in reasonable health, and your heart needs to be okay. So medical pre-screening is actually extremely important, because it eradicates people who are just not suitable candidates for Ibogaine therapy. It removes that from the picture. It's important not to treat people with pre-existing heart problems, because that can lead to significant adverse events with Ibogaine. Medical setting is quite important.
What are the health risks involved with Ibogaine?
Well, Ibogaine can cause arrhythmias. It can cause bradycardia. It causes QT prolongation. To sum it all up, Ibogaine affects how your heart is working. It can slow it down considerably, and it's very important, again, to be in a clinically managed, medically supervised environment with MDs present who are familiar with how Ibogaine works. Because if there is any kind of a glitch, if there's any kind of an adverse event, it can be caught and controlled, and it will not result in a fatality. There have been multiple fatalities associated with Ibogaine across the years, and almost 100% of those can be attributed to two things. One of them is a complete lack of pre-screening, which is, for example, the underground and informal treatment scenes where, they're treating people. They have no idea what their pre-existing medical conditions are. In many cases, the client doesn't know, or they're lying about it. That you're working with all these variables you have no control over. And on top of that, you need that medical environment, because if anything starts to go wrong, you can correct that. You can't correct any of these things if you're dosing in an informal sort of environment with people who don't really know what they're doing.
Are there different forms of Ibogaine?
There are. The form that we primarily work with is Ibogaine hydrochloride, which is very purified. It's hitting 99.8% purity, and that's the form that pretty much all medical research has focused on. If you look at PubMed, for instance, and type in Ibogaine, you will find something in the neighborhood of 500 different monographs appearing in peer-reviewed medical journals that can attest to Ibogaine's efficacy versus a variety of polysubstance abuse disorders. And probably out of that 500, there's about 50 that are really good, that basically will give you an in-depth overview of what's happening, what the outcomes are, and how well you can expect for it to work. There, in addition to the Ibogaine hydrochloride, there is also total alkaloid, and there's partial total alkaloid extract, which basically keeps more of the different alkaloids that are found within Tabernanthe iboga in the mix, and you can administer that to people. The downside of doing that is that there's been absolutely no clinical research that's taken place with any of those other alkaloids. So we tend to focus exclusively on Ibogaine hydrochloride because that is the substance which has undergone significant testing, and we know what to expect. We know what results it will generate, and we know how to work with it. It doesn't introduce a lot of unknown variables which may be difficult to control in a treatment episode.
We'll have more with Patrick Kroupa right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and Canada. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol ASDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Patrick Kroupa. Patrick, is Ibogaine a hallucinogenic?
Well, Ibogaine gets lumped in with hallucinogens and psychedelics. It actually has extraordinarily low affinity at HT2A, which is the receptor that most classical hallucinogens like LSD or psilocybin attach themselves to. Now, if you are a person that's ever done psychedelics, or you've done, let's say, LSD, Ibogaine is not nearly as strong as that. By that I mean, if you do a very high dose of LSD and what you're seeing is really disturbing you, and you open your eyes, then really nothing has changed. You're still there. You're still in your trip. Ibogaine has been termed an neurogen, which is from a word that literally means a dream-inducing substance. You're sort of in a waking dream. And if you open your eyes, you're right back on planet Earth in the room and the space that you're in, and you sort of have awareness of these things. So it's not as harsh or as strong as most other psychedelic substances. You do trip, but it's relatively different than most other psychedelics.
So is that what someone can expect to experience with Ibogaine?
Well, essentially what happens, I mean, to give you a brief burst of like background, when I first detoxed with Ibogaine during the 1990s, I was a high functioning addict. I mean, I was addicted to heroin, but at the same time, I was running multiple companies. We were, the third internet access provider in the United States. I had tried every form of drug treatment that was available at the time. I had tried methadone maintenance. I had tried, I was on the very early clinical trials for buprenorphine, where they were trying to make it bioavailable sublingually, which they obviously succeeded with because that became Subutex and Suboxone. I tried ultra-rapid opiate detox twice. I basically tried every form of drug treatment, and nothing worked for me. With Ibogaine, prior to doing it, I was on 200 milligrams a day of methadone, and I was doing about a gram and a half, maybe a bit more than that, of heroin on top of that every single day. And, doing a back-of-hand calculation, that's enough to kill 15 to 20 people who don't have tolerance. But as you keep doing these things, your tolerance gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you're doing these huge doses of a drug just to stay normal and function. It's not getting you high, it's just getting you normal. And it's a relatively accurate depiction of slavery because you can't get out of this cycle. So when I did Ibogaine, it was about 8 hours after my last dose of narcotic analgesics. I was extremely sick. I was going through full-blown withdrawal, which is very unpleasant. I mean, you're hot, then you're cold, you're sweating, you're shaking, your bones feel like they're being smashed. It's extraordinarily unpleasant and painful. Within 30 to 45 minutes of ingesting Ibogaine, it felt like being suspended sort of in this warm ocean of energy. And all the pain is going away, all of the symptoms are dissipating, and wow, my habit is gone. There's nothing I have ever experienced that has done this. This is as close to a miracle as I have ever experienced. And then right after that, the journey begins and you start to trip, and you're going to be very busy for about the next 8 hours processing all of that material that's coming at you. But essentially what occurs is within 30 to 45 minutes, your drug dependence has been completely reset. And after that, you have the whole trip that comes with it and all the psychological material that you're processing and everything else that you're dealing with.
What are the potential side effects of Ibogaine?
Well, the potential side effects sort of loop back to making sure that you have adequate medical pre-screening and medical supervision, because the potential side effects are basically all heart-related in the sense that it can significantly slow down your heartbeat, it can drop your blood pressure, and you need to have an MD present who is familiar with how Ibogaine works while you're undergoing treatment to make sure that you are safely treated as opposed to have a significant problem.
If a patient relapses and uses drugs again, can a second Ibogaine treatment be done?
It can, yes. In my own case, just, being forthright, my first Ibogaine treatment was not a great success. I screwed everything up pretty rapidly, and I did relapse. And then I went back for a second one about 6-8 weeks later, and that's 19 years ago that I've been clean at this point. The difference between the first and the second time was the first time I did it, it was, okay, my drug dependence is gone. That's amazing. But what rains down on you suddenly are all of your psychological issues, which have driven you to self-medicate in the first place. Almost everybody that we have ever treated is dual diagnosis, which means you have comorbid medical conditions that you are, well, you're self-medicating. In my case, I had PTSD amongst other issues. And the difference between the first time and the second time was, okay, this is what Ibogaine will do. This is what it will not do. This is where I have to step up and start living a different kind of life, process all of these things that I have not ever processed, and move forward. I mean, that's the work that, aftercare involves. So yes, people can receive multiple Ibogaine treatments, and there are quite a few people who fail the first time, the second time, and okay, so the third time it worked. But generally what happens is the periods of time get longer and longer. So the first time something bad happens, you relapse, you pick yourself back up. The second time you tend to have a much longer span of time, and so on. For most people, for most very hardcore drug dependent individuals, one or two treatments should be sufficient to, interrupt their drug dependence, provided that you have that aftercare component in place. Aftercare is critical for the long-term positive outcome.
Is there a limit to the amount of Ibogaine a person can take over their lifetime?
Not that we're presently aware of. I mean, I know some individuals who have taken Ibogaine many, many times. I'm talking 30, 40, 50 times. In those cases, though, they're not taking it for drug dependence. They're usually taking it for spiritual insights. They're part of some, ceremony or psychospiritual practices that involve Ibogaine, and usually they're microdosing. They're not doing the flood. The flood treatment is the very high dose of Ibogaine to eradicate your drug dependence. Microdosing is more like taking very small doses, which are a sub-psychoactive threshold. So you're not tripping, you're not having all that, you're just getting sort of mild anti-addictive effects from it.
Could Ibogaine provide a significant solution to the opioid crisis?
Yeah, in a word, yes, because the opioid epidemic is a complete disaster. I mean, within the United States, as of 2018, the leading cause of accidental death for people under the age of 50 is ODing on drugs. In Canada, it's the same train wreck. I mean, I've visited Vancouver. I've been through Hastings recently. I mean, Hastings looks like the Lower East Side used to look like in the 90s, or the Mission District in San Francisco looked like in the 90s. I mean, you're stepping over bodies laying on the sidewalks in pools of vomit. There's 2 dead bodies a day coming out of there. It's a complete mess. And, the situation in the United States and Canada is sort of repeating itself worldwide. It's an epidemic that has absolutely no viable solutions at the present time. The only thing that big pharmaceutical companies have come out with are substitution therapies, which, replace one addictive substance with another addictive substance. None of them produce an effective detox or a quote-unquote cure. I put quotes around cure because, again, the cure part requires work on an individual's part. It requires the aftercare component. But Ibogaine, a ballpark figure is, right now, the success rate for drug treatment within the United States, within Canada, is roughly 4% to a high point of 6%. And 6% is being kind. So let's ballpark it and say that drug treatment has a 95% failure rate. That's horrible. If you were in any other industry on earth and your product had a 95% failure rate, you'd be out of business pretty much instantly, because obviously what you have is not working. And that's what we have with drug dependence treatment. Ibogaine moves that significantly. So let me be reality-based. Ibogaine has a overall success rate of, let's say, 50 to 60%. And that can be significantly higher. It can be 80% or 90%, provided that, again, the individual participates in some form of aftercare to maintain their newfound sobriety.
Have you spoken to any governments yet about using Ibogaine to deal with this problem?
Well, those conversations are ongoing, apparently both within the United States and within Canada. Basically, there have been a variety of bills which have, gone out in the United States. So far, none of them has gained any traction and been approved. But there's a tremendous amount of hope that Ibogaine will be available to at least some individuals within the United States under the auspices of a variety of pilot programs that deal with emergency situations, which is what the opioid epidemic has become. And Trump has been pretty effective at sort of streamlining and cutting through a lot of the tangled up regulatory issues related to making drugs available to patients who need them and without access to them don't have any hope of getting out of their condition or their medical situation, which is the case with drug dependence right now.
Without naming names, have celebrities and high net worth people been using Ibogaine to treat their addictions?
Okay. And in a word, yes. There have been quite a few high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals that we have worked with across the years. In the beginning, that used to be the majority of the patients came from those backgrounds. I mean, you had celebrities, you had hedge fund managers, you had people who are professional athletes. You basically had people with significant resources and significant drug problems. During the past 5 to 10 years, that has changed to essentially include everybody because OxyContin happened. What used to happen in the beginning was like, why are you here? And it's, well, okay, because I do heroin or I smoke crack or something like that. Now that narrative has shifted and it's become, why are you here? And the answer tends to be, well, my doctor wrote me this prescription for these pills. And then I took these pills for a couple of years and then suddenly my doctor said, oh, hey, sorry, the laws have changed. I can't prescribe these pills to you anymore. And magically enough, their drug dependence does not go away. So now they have a problem. They're addicted. They can no longer get their prescriptions and then they, have to go buy Oxy on the black market where it costs significantly more. And almost immediately, most people discover that, oh, hey, heroin is a lot cheaper and a lot more effective. And now, to introduce a brand new variable to the entire mess that we have, fentanyl has kind of taken over both the United States and Canada because fentanyl is a synthetic that is considerably cheaper to manufacture than heroin, and it's active in microgram doses instead of milligram doses. So you've got a really cheap synthetic opioid, and it's flooding our countries. But to loop back to exactly what you asked, yes, there are quite a few ultra high net worth individuals who have experienced Ibogaine treatment, and if some of them wanted to ever speak out about that, that would probably greatly accelerate the process of Ibogaine receiving greater attention and greater acceptance.
Is Ibogaine expensive?
It varies by what you mean by expensive. It's relatively cheap in comparison to a treatment at a hospital. It costs less than an average detox. I mean, you go to an average detox or rehab center and they're charging you, $25,000, $30,000 a month to basically sit around in a bunch of rooms and talk about your problems without actually solving anything. Ibogaine treatment usually runs in the ballpark of about $7,000 for roughly a week-long stay at a medical facility. So in contrast to most other forms of drug treatment, it is very cheap and it's very effective. The problem is Ibogaine has not been medicalized as of yet in most parts of the world. New Zealand has medicalized Ibogaine and Brazil is in the process of doing so. But within the United States and Canada, what it boils down to is your insurance is not going to be paying for your Ibogaine treatment. So you're going to have to pick up that cost.
How can people find out more about Ibogaine treatments?
Well, a good place to look are, information websites online. There's, clearskyibogaine.com has a large variety of Ibogaine treatment information online. Universal Ibogaine is in the process of coming together right now, and all the pieces are kind of coming into play. So there's not too much there, but there are various organizations. For instance, there is ICEERS. ICEERS has a website that has information on Ibogaine. ICEERS is a nonprofit run by Ben DeLonin. There is GITA, which is the Global Ibogaine Therapists Alliance. They have quite a bit of information on Ibogaine. There is MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and that one was started by Rick Doblin, who is, the person who has basically dragged MDMA through the entire medicalization process in the United States, wherein it's now in phase 3 clinical trials. So there's a lot of information out there. If you just type Ibogaine into a browser, and you sift through the stuff, which is just blatant advertising, there's a lot of really good information about its origins, its evolution, and where you might obtain it.
Patrick, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
My guest has been Patrick Kroupa, president of Universal Ibogaine Incorporated, online at ibogaineinc.com. He's a consultant for Clear Sky Recovery, online at clearskyibogaine.com. If you have any questions for our guests or the show, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.